to a devoutly Catholic and prosperous farming family in a Catalan village near Barcelona. He was born 70 years after King Ferdinand of Spain set the colonial slavery culture into motion by authorizing the purchase of 250 African slaves in Lisbon for his territories in New Spain. Later, as a student of the University of Barcelona, Claver was noted for his intelligence and piety. After 2 years of study there, Claver wrote these words in a notebook that he kept throughout his life. I must dedicate myself to the service of God until death, on the understanding that I am like a slave. After he completed his studies, he entered the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, at the age of 20. When he had completed the novitiate, he was sent to study philosophy at Mallorca. While there, he came to know the porter of the college, Alphonsus Rodriguez. He was a lay brother known for his holiness and his gift of prophecy. Rodriguez felt that he had been told by God that Claver was to spend his life in service to the colonies of New Spain, and he frequently urged the young Claver to accept that calling. Claver volunteered for the Spanish colonies and was sent to Granada, where he arrived in the port city of Cartagena in 1610. He spent 6 years studying theology there before being ordained a priest. During those preparatory years, he was deeply disturbed by the harsh treatment and the living conditions of the black slaves who were being brought from Africa. By this time, the slave trade had been established in the Americas for about a century. Local natives were considered physically ill-suited to work in the gold and silver mines. Mine owners met their labor requirements by importing blacks from Angola and the Congo, whom they purchased in West Africa. Others were captured at random, especially able-bodied males and females deemed suitable for labor. Cartagena was a slave trading hub, and 10,000 slaves came into the port yearly, crossing the Atlantic from the West African countries under conditions so foul that an estimated 1/3 died in transit. Although the slave trade was condemned by Pope Paul III and Pope Urban VIII, it was a lucrative business and continued to flourish. Claver's predecessor in his eventual lifelong mission, Alonso de Sandoval, was his mentor and his inspiration. Sandoval had devoted himself to serving the slaves for 40 years before Claver arrived to continue his work. Sandoval attempted to learn about their customs and languages. He was so successful that when he returned to Seville, he wrote a book in 1627 about the nature, customs, rights, and beliefs of the Africans. Sandoval found Claver a good pupil. When he was finally professed in 1622, Claver signed his final profession document in Latin as Peter Claver, servant of the black people forever. Sandoval had visited the slaves where they worked, but Claver preferred to head for the wharf as soon as a slave ship entered the port. Boarding the ship, he entered the filthy and diseased holds to treat and minister to their badly treated, terrified human cargo, who had survived a voyage of several months under horrible conditions. It was difficult to move around on the ships because the slave traffickers filled them to capacity. Claver wore a cloak, which he would often lend to anyone in need. A legend arose that whoever wore the cloak received health and was cured of all disease. After the slaves were herded from the ship and penned in nearby yards to be scrutinized by buyers, Claver joined them with medicine, food, bread, and lemons. With the help of interpreters and pictures that he carried with him, he gave basic instructions in the faith. Claver saw slaves as fellow Christians, encouraging others to do so as well. During the season when slavers were not accustomed to arrive, he traveled through the country, visiting plantation after plantation to give spiritual consolation to the slaves. During his 40 years of ministry, it's estimated that he personally catechized and baptized 300,000 slaves. He would then follow up with them to ensure that as Christians, they received their Christian and civil rights. His mission extended beyond caring for slaves, however. He preached in the city square to sailors and traders and conducted country missions, returning every spring to visit those he had baptized. During these missions, whenever possible, he avoided the hospitality of planters and overseers. Instead, he would lodge in the slave quarters. Klaver's work on behalf of slaves did not prevent him from ministering to the souls of well-to-do members of society. Traders and visitors to Cartagena, including Muslims and English Protestants. He worked with condemned criminals, many of whom he spiritually prepared for death. He was also a frequent visitor at the city hospitals. Through years of unremitting work and the force of his own personality, the slave's situation slowly improved. In time, he became a moral force known as the Apostle of Cartagena. In the last years of his life, Peter Klaver was too ill to leave his bedroom. He lingered for 4 years, largely forgotten and neglected, physically abused, and even starved by an ex-slave who had been hired by the superior to care for him. He never complained about his treatment. He accepted it as a just punishment for his sins. He died on September 8, 1654. When the people of the city heard of his death, many forced their way into his room to pay their last respects. The city officials, who had previously considered him a nuisance for his persistent advocacy on behalf of the slaves, ordered a public funeral, and he was buried with great pomp and ceremony. He was canonized in 1888, along with the porter Alphonsus Rodriguez. In 1896, he was declared the patron of missionary work among all African people. He is also the patron saint of Colombia. In our day and age, the issue of the treatment of people of color is still at the forefront of our national conversation. We need men and women of faith to be a voice for those who are sometimes demeaned because of the color of their skin. Through the intercession of St. Peter Klaver, may we all strive to overcome the sin of racism in our world